report on this computer? Yeah. All right. Welcome everyone to the information session of the Racial Equity Roundtable here with Forward Through Ferguson. This is the Cross Sector Racial Equity Roundtable starting off in 2022. Thank you for being here today. Today we'll go through some introductions of the facilitators. We'll share with you who we are and then our why from Forward Through Ferguson. We'll go over what the roundtable is all about, how to apply, and then we'll have a Q&A session and a visioning activity. We're excited to talk with you today. And so we learned quickly in our equity work over time that it really calls on us to better understand personal relationship and the relationship between our experiences as individuals to the policies and systems that we work in, and the systems that build and shape St. Louis. So first we'll start by telling you a little bit of our stories. This is the Racial Equity Capacity Building team, and I'll pass to Fabra to tell your story first. You're on the left in this slide.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for the introduction, Sarah. Once again, I'm Fabra. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the honor and privilege of leading the Build Racial Equity Capacity strategy of Forward Through Ferguson. Before coming to FTF 2 years ago, I've been mostly in the nonprofit sectors for the past 13 years now. Most of my jobs and contributions have been in the field of education. So K through 12 education, higher ed, and also helping small nonprofits start up, particularly small nonprofits that have a social justice cause or a cause for equity. So all of this is my jam. I was in a partnership with Forward Through Ferguson to help bring more racial equity capacity trainings to different nonprofits beginning in 2016. And so after 2016, I was just kind of following FTF and really interested in the work and what was happening in regards to the calls to action since the commission sunsetted in the commission report, and the hashtag FTL 2039 plan has been out in the world. And when there was an opportunity to join the staff, I was interested. I showed up, and I have been here since then. I am the primary facilitator of the Racial Equity Roundtables, but Sarah has been my right hand partner in this work, part-time person, but full-time contributor, full and whole contributor, and I could not have done this without her. And also just welcoming and so grateful for Russell, who is now a senior Racial Equity Capacity Fellow, who's also really put his hands and contribution onto the work of expanding our Racial Equity Roundtables over the past year. We went from having one standing roundtable to now having multiple roundtables, which is awesome. So I'm really excited about that. Was there anything that I missed that you think I should capture in my intro, Sarah? I feel like I don't always say everything that I could say about my intro, but
I thought it was fantastic, and you can share more as we go. So that sound good?
Well, I'll pass it back to Sarah and Russell.
Wonderful, thank you. So yeah, as Fabra said, my name is Sarah Murphy, she, they pronouns, and I'm the Racial Equity Support Catalyst. I joined the FTF team in 2020 as a fellow and just kept signing back on because I love following Fabra's leadership. I love the leadership of Forward Through Ferguson, but my background is in education as well. I was born in St. Louis. I went to Clayton schools. I was, born into a position of privilege as a white woman going to one of the best school districts in the state, and was always the kind of kid who asked why. So as I noticed things that didn't quite make sense to me, like why it was so much harder to be friends with the kids that were in the desegregation program that got bussed in, why the desegregation program existed, why this and why that. I kept asking questions why, and those questions were supported. So throughout my educational experience, I kept asking those things and got involved in educational programs and then educational policy, and went to graduate school in New York in 2014, shortly before Michael Brown Jr. was killed. And I wanted to come home and get involved in the movement. And my mom said, no, you will sit down and you will finish your degree. And then you will leverage that position to sustainably change policies and systems as you go. And as always, her wisdom has has prevailed. So I came back and got involved in the area, and went to graduate school again for a PhD at WashU. And so now I work full time at WashU doing equitable policy and systems change there. And then in part time, I get to work with FTF. And so one of my primary roles is the Racial Equity Roundtable. It's an incredible experience to watch the progression of these organizations come in questioning and then leave with concrete action plans for how to infuse racial equity into their organizations and the cultures and policies that dictate their everyday life. So I love being here. I'm excited to be here. And I'll pass it over to Russell.
Y'all have amazing intros. My name is Russell Beckham. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm a St. Louis transplant, so originally from Springfield, Virginia, right outside DC. Came here to study about 5 years ago, and I have a background in urban studies. And so through that period, just a lot of questioning about specifically institutional racism, a lot of questioning how it impacts people's lives, how it impacts systems, and the role that I have in changing those systems. And so I became a fellow at FTF this past summer for the Racial Equity and Capacity Building program and department, and just have been here to support the amazing work that Faber and Sarah do in looking at St. Louis as a region and really advancing racial equity throughout the area.
Thank you so much, Russell. And thank you again, Sarah, for your introduction as well. So for the next part, we just want to give a brief orientation to who we are. We don't want to make the assumption that everyone who's joined today or who might be listening to the recording knows, everything that they could know about us as an organization. So we'll just share a little bit more about who we are and our why, what brings us here. So as you all may know, the work of Forward Through Ferguson actually began with the Ferguson Commission that was called in 2014. There were 16 community members spanning all sectors and belief systems who were brought together by the former governor after the killing of Mike Brown Jr. in Ferguson. So the commission took up the call to confront and engage with the community pain and the regional experiences in the uprising that followed the killing, and to engage with it by naming the underlying root causes. So what actually caused the Ferguson uprising to happen, and what's going to be the solutions to prevent it from happening again. So while the commission is named for the events in Ferguson, we all know that the root causes and outcomes in question are in no way isolated to one suburban North County area in St. Louis. So the commission ended up holding over 70 meetings, incorporating the insights of over 3,000 community members, contributing over 30,000 volunteer hours to create the finalized commission report. And so the commission process made it clear that for decades, our siloed systems had allowed and were still allowing racial equity to fall through the cracks. So the commission produced nearly 200 policy calls to action to start with changing those systems and closing those cracks. So we've kind of given in to the saying that, when people remark on the volume of the calls to action in the report, that another way to look at it is that there's one core call to action: deal with the St. Louis region's racial inequities. And so the next couple slides, just a couple data points that we've really incorporated into our wheelhouse and really internalized as an organization, and are trying to help spread the word about this so that organizations that are anchor institutions and individuals who are catalysts can continue to work and to act upon this information. So what is solving racial inequities? What does it mean? Where is it, right? We know that we still see it in median household wealth. The gaps in between Black and white residents in particular are huge, and they haven't changed that much since the 60s, which is significant. We also see it in home ownership rate and in incarceration rates. And these statistics could be a little bit larger even since the pandemic, but this is our most recent study of home ownership rates and the incarceration rates that were in the Ferguson Commission report. We always like to begin with how these racial inequities impact people of color, but we also recognize that we would be remiss to ignore the fact that racial inequity harms everyone and everyone in our region. Some economists at the UMSL Public Policy Research Center estimated in 2012 that St. Louis's regional GDP suffered a $13 billion loss because of its racial income gaps. So our data team actually redid this analysis in 2016 and found that the number actually has increased to over 17 billion lost in GDP due to racial and income disparities. So think of the possibilities that are withheld, trapped in that 17 billion, which since COVID is also larger. We were kind of in the middle of a study about what it has looked like since the pandemic hit in 2020. So it is getting larger, the gaps are getting larger, and we're suffering more as a region because racial inequities persist. And so what are we called to do? Forward Through Ferguson was born at the end of the commission out of a vocal community desire that a freestanding organization, a social impact organization, should still exist to ensure that these calls to action are catalyzed, owned by the community, and that there's also an accountable body that seeks to provide support as well as pressure to the region to not let the legacy of the Ferguson uprising just subside. So what does racial equity mean for us? I'd like to give credit to Dr. Kira Banks, as well as Nicole Hudson and David Dwight, who are founding staff and founding facilitators of the Racial Equity Roundtable, the first couple iterations of the Racial Equity Roundtable. And they've defined racial equity as a state in which outcomes are no longer predictable by race. So this means when all of our systems, all of our institutions are working well for all people, and therefore outcomes become excellent and random, that is how we know that racial equity has been achieved. We also hone in on racial equity in particular because of the specific call to action from the Ferguson Commission report. And also we recognize that the construct of race intersects with every other identity point of our lives. And so it could be argued that if we solve for the race issue, it could also have potentially some effects on other aspects of our lives and identities and mitigating identity politics as well. So just food for thought, something to think about. Another thing we recognize too, that as the Ferguson Commission sunsetted and the report was out into the world, that there wasn't an implementation plan. And so once FTF became a freestanding organization in 2018, there was a published report and a plan that we have titled the hashtag STL 2039 plan and vision. So we live into the calls of the commission through our three-pronged action strategies of advocating for policy and systems change, building racial equity capacity, and generating the capital, financial capital and human capital needed to sustain the work and facilitate long-term change. So those three action strategies combined with the right heart set for the work, is what we call it, will allow us to achieve hashtag STL 2039, or more simply put, a racially equitable St. Louis 25 years after, one generation after the killing of Michael Brown. And the Racial Equity Roundtable is a part of the Build Racial Equity Capacity strategy, which the goals overall are to cultivate and activate change, facilitate this change to be long-term change, and to also measure progress and amplify success.
So within that equation, Forward Through Ferguson doesn't operate as a diversity and inclusion trainer or practitioner. So we want to be clear about that, though we are not working to replace diversity and inclusion practitioners. Instead, we were created to carry forth the community insight and vision of the Ferguson Commission, which identified the need for all people, all organizations identifying the path for themselves. So for the region to move from awareness of racial inequities to transformational action that eliminates those inequities, Forward to Ferguson acts as a wayfinder. And we define wayfinder as helping people and institutions find their starting point, strategize the journey forward, create next practices, and discover how to be a radically accountable partner in systems change. And so that looks like developing plans of action, connect capacity building resources, including trainers, specialists, tools, and models, but also each other, creating a community of practice for the work. And so when we reference the path to racial equity, we're talking about this model. And so this model was developed to express the key elements of our theory of change. And so those are that as members of the St. Louis region, we are all on a path to racial equity that requires focus on the individual, institutional, and regional levels. And so before we can transform the region towards equity, which you see on the right side of this model, we must first move through the stages of awareness of those inequities at each level, and then through the processes of learning and unlearning, we deepen our understanding about why they exist, and then with that grounding, we can take informed action to try things out for transformation. So each stage is crucial. So often we want to jump towards transforming. We want to take action. We want to do something about it, and we recognize that when we do that, because of the deeply entrenched and complex nature of systemic racism, that often sets us up to unintentionally replicate the harms, perpetuate the inequities that we're trying to solve. So even when we move through them too, it's not exactly linear. We can realize that we have deep understanding of something, and then something will happen and we'll realize there's a whole nother layer that we weren't aware of. Or we as individuals might be ready and willing to do the transformational work, but our whole institution isn't along with us in that process. And so we recognize with great compassion and humility that everyone is at different stages along this, but if we can all build shared language and work to move through them, then we're more likely to create sustaining change towards equity-driven strategies and ultimately liberation, finding ourselves building an equitable future together.
Well said.
And so one of the ways we offer to do that is the Roundtable. And so we offer this testimonial from a Racial Equity Roundtable 2.0 participant. This round will be 4.0. And they said that the Roundtable has helped us in thinking through and working to establish continued ongoing practices to habitualize and establish expectations of centering racial equity in our individual behavior and our organizational work. It's a long sentence, but there's so much great wisdom in there. So we also offer multiple workshops as well as processes that we move through with organizations. And so this information session is focused on the Racial Equity Roundtables, which is one of the longest commitment over the greatest amount of time for your organization. But we also offer the St. Louis 2039 workshop, which is 2 workshops over 2 weeks. A systems change primer, which is for individuals as well as organizational teams. That is a 4-hour workshop to think about the basics of systems change. And then if you want to do a tailored racial equity capacity assessment of your organization, we work with organizations to administer a survey to up to 50 of your employees. And then from those responses, we're able to identify some areas of growth and some possible themes to move forward in terms of making action plans, and then general consultations as well. So we offer this, those are all on our website here at this address, the bit.ly/racial equity capacity. And we invite you to check those out as well as the detailed information we'll share about the Racial Equity Roundtable today.
All right. So Racial Equity Roundtable 4.0, what are we going to do? I think that if you all had a chance to look at our website, you may have seen some of these things already, but I will just read them to you all anyway. The main components are the case study creation. So each participating organization will complete a case study about where they are in regards to some key areas of racial equity. So we asked some specific questions about you all's investment, staffing, et cetera, et cetera. And the purpose of this is to examine your organizational history, current landscape, and also identify some strengths and challenges. The next part is resource generation. So in our discussions, we pull together curated resources. They could be readings, models, and also frameworks that we have circulating together as a full group that also you can take back home into your organization to workshop and to utilize to start pulling together your action plans. We also have intergroup dialogue, which means big whole group discussions. And then also we split off occasionally into affinity groups, which would be some identity-based safe spaces to talk through some of the tough topics that tend to come up in this work to ensure a space of courage, a space of honesty and accountability, and also encouragement. Encouragement and compassion. So that's our goal for those group discussions. And also in that, community building. So while the roundtables provide a space for shared learning and also shared action planning and strategy, we also offer an intentional focus on cultivating trust and building relationships, as well as strategizing the practice of radical collaboration. So that is what we hope to and seek to provide as the structure for the roundtable. Another quote from a participant is that they said that the Racial Equity Roundtable has given us the chance to further operationalize our commitments. The content that was shared throughout has been thought-provoking and super applicable, which we're happy to hear that folks have found it applicable and feasible and attainable work that they can take up and accomplish. Pass it to Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, so in those 9 months, what will you get? What are the outcomes that we work to deliver for you to take up and take back? So starting with leadership development, we offer a curriculum that leverages racial equity systems change strategies for thinking in terms of like the testimonial just said, really operationalizing. You may believe deeply in your heart that this is important, but what does it mean to really put that into practice? And at the end of each session, we request that participants complete an individual reflection form that we use as formative assessment to respond to the specific needs of the group. And we really work to tailor the experience to best meet your needs as a cohort as you grow and change together. Through the case studies of the participating institutions that, like Fabra described, you'll engage in problem solving in a community of practice. So over time, we really build trust that fosters the radical honesty that you need to dig into the real heart of the problems, dig into the tensions of this work, to face them together, and then to work on moving along the path to racial equity together. And a case by case, really rooted in actual practice. So we'll share some theory, but it really is based in practical problem solving. We also ask that you complete baseline and growth assessments as the first and last at the first and last sessions, so that we can help you as an organization evaluate key aspects of where you need to grow from both a 10,000-foot view and down deep into the weeds. And so you'll be able to see the impact over time when we provide those reports to you. And then that helps, especially if you're in a large institution, that if you're coming representative of a smaller segment of your institution, you can bring that data back to your overall leaders. And oftentimes what you need to do is request more resources to continue doing the work, and or the freedom and flexibility to be creative with the resources that you have. And then the last point, Fabra already got at this a little bit, but really this network, an accountable, radically collaborative network of cross-sector leaders that are dedicated to breaking down silos and building both the new muscles and the new systems we need to achieve racial equity in the region. I like to quote Billy Mayo, one of the elders in this work, that the best friend of oppression are silence and isolation. And so at the roundtable, we work against all that. We talk about it and we talk about it together, and we set up systems for you all to talk about it with your accountability partners monthly, and build in structures for you to connect in each one of the sessions as well. So our final testimonial from the round that is finishing up in the next few months, that said, I feel the information and feedback provided throughout the roundtable experience is pivotal in our forward momentum towards our racial equity policy. So just words of the participants that it's been a really helpful experience for them, where people don't know where to start. We help you figure out where to go.
Okay, so next we'll review a little bit of answering the question of how do you apply. For this, we'll start with a higher level overview, and then move into looking at the application and questions afterwards. So for each organization, you'll have 2 representatives, which you'll list within the application. The application will be due by March 25th. I'm dropping a link in the chat currently for the application that you can view on your own as well. And so within that application, you'll kind of review each section. For membership fees, there will be a section in there that we'll glance through today. And then the Racial Equity Roundtable as a whole is just meant for a collective learning experience, to really build community both within and between your organizations. And so we do encourage that you and the partners within your network do apply, even if you're within a similar field. And so I'm going to try to pull up the screen share for the application. Sarah, would you be able to screen share? I can pull it up.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Moment, please. There it is. Okay.
Technology. So kind of just starting with the top, the Racial Equity Roundtable will be from July 22nd, or July 2022 to April 2023, and then due March 25th. And kind of scrolling down, some of these will be things that Faber and Sarah have reviewed, but this will be in more depth, like review of FTF's purpose, vision, the hashtag 2039 action plan, which is used in session, a little bit of the roundtable overview and history. So going through different iterations of the roundtable, the key components of the roundtable and what you will get from it. And then in terms of eligibility, so the guidelines for participants within the organization, within that as well. Again, teams of 2, each representative will have specific commitments to the roundtable. You're expected to also become a little bit more familiar with our tools, which we'll be teaching with, and then that at least one of the members of the 2 within your team is within the institutional leadership, or will be able to have influence in advancing policies for racial equity within the organization. And so moving down to the application timeline, there's a more detailed timeline of when the roundtable will start, with the initial meeting on July 8th. And then again, just highlighting the application dates. The application is currently live, and then will be due yet again for March 25th. Institutions selected and notified on April 22nd. And then the signature and deposits due afterwards. Just as a general kind of reminder, all the participants here currently will receive an email afterwards with dates and information. For roundtable fees, this is again on a sliding scale, so depends on each organization, but funds are also available for support as well on request. And the contact information for both Fabra and me and Sarah is below. Okay. And then just finally, the application link will be linked in the final portion of the application at the bottom. Once you click that link, you'll be directed to a survey which you will fill out. The survey requires you to add those 2 participants, and then you also do have the opportunity to place alternative participants in there as well. And then just filling out different pieces of the application questions, and additional information. Okay. And so just open up the floor. Does anybody have like questions about the application or anything on their mind? Or in addition to that, if Fabian or Sarah, you have any details to add, feel free to.
We do. Before we go to Q&A about the application itself, we have just a little bit of closing just to kind of leave people with as they pull their questions for us. We always like to wrap up our sessions, and regardless of if it's a full facilitation or a short facilitation, with a couple words about a culture of trying and the importance of a culture of trying. And this was actually some words that came out of the Ferguson Commission report. In trying, in cultivating a culture of trying, new coalitions will be built and a new sense of community will be developed. As the region tries together, people will learn new things from each other and generate new ideas they would have never come up with if they'd said, that's too risky to try, or better to leave well enough alone, or worst of all, that'll never work here. So we're hoping that through our racial equity capacity building strategy, particularly the Racial Equity Roundtable, that we can help organizations start to shift their culture, practice, and systems away from business as usual, because business as usual won't gain us equity. Equity requires transformation. So a hallmark of our work is synthesizing and sharing out how we're trying to live into that and our desire to do things differently. So we also understand that there are risks in trying and that there are no guarantees. However, the act of trying does change the odds. So our commitment to you all today is that FTF is here to support and to support you as well as the whole region as we try. And we're hoping to travel down that path with you. So thank you so much for joining this session today. And we will stop the recording. So thank you to the people who are watching the recording. And if you have questions for us on the website that you are viewing, you have our contact information. So thank you so much.